My husband cheated on me with my own sister and took my kids. I just smirked. When he walked into court, his lawyer went pale. He had no idea I'd been keeping one folder of documents all these years. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me what I was like before everything fell apart. They expect me to say I was naive, or blind, or one of those women who simply refuse to see. But that isn't the truth. The truth is that I saw everything. I just didn't know yet what I was looking at. My name is Claire Mercer. For 11 years, I was a wife, a mother, a woman who kept her family together the way you keep a house, quietly, constantly, without applause. My husband, Daniel, was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus, Ohio. We had a 4-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane, 2 kids, Lily, who was 9, and Owen, who was 6, and a golden retriever named Scout who tracked mud across the kitchen floor every single morning. It was a normal life. It was a good life, or so I believed. I worked part-time as a paralegal at a small family law firm downtown. People thought that was ironic later. I didn't find it ironic at all. I found it useful. The first sign came on a Tuesday in October, the kind of gray, drizzly Ohio Tuesday that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Daniel came home from work 40 minutes late and said nothing about it. That alone meant nothing. But when he sat down at the dinner table, he put his phone face down next to his plate. He had never done that before. Daniel was the kind of man who left his phone charging on the counter, screen up, unlocked. He had nothing to hide, or so I had always assumed. I didn't say anything that night. I watched him pass the salad to Lily and help Owen cut his chicken, and I stored the image of that phone, face down, like a file I wasn't ready to open. The second sign came 3 weeks later. My younger sister, Dana, canceled our standing Saturday lunch for the first time in 2 years. She texted me. Something came up, rain check. Dana and I had been close our entire lives. She was 4 years younger, funnier than me, quicker to laugh, and always 10 minutes late. But she never canceled. Not once. Not even when she had the flu. I texted back. Of course. Everything okay? She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Dana had never sent me a thumbs-up emoji in her life. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding my phone, while Scout scratched at the back door and the kids argued upstairs over a video game. The house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet something had shifted, 1 degree, maybe 2, in a direction I couldn't name yet. Over the following weeks, I began to notice the pattern. Daniel started going to the gym on Sunday mornings. He had not gone to a gym in 4 years. He began wearing his wedding ring less often, citing a rash. He started laughing differently, lighter, faster, at nothing I could see. He began coming home smelling faintly of a soap that wasn't ours. And Dana, who used to drop by unannounced with wine and bad reality TV opinions, suddenly became unavailable. She was always busy. She started posting less on Instagram. When she did post, she cropped her photos differently, tighter, more careful, like she was hiding her background. I am a paralegal. I spend my days reading between lines that other people wrote carelessly. I know what concealment looks like. I know what people do when they're protecting a secret. They become smaller, quieter, more deliberate. They start choosing their words. They stop being spontaneous. They lose the ease that comes from having nothing to hide. By December, I had a cold, settled feeling in my chest that I recognized but refused to name. And then came the night I came home early from a firm Christmas party because Lily had a fever. Daniel's car was in the driveway. The lights in the kitchen were on. I came in through the back door, quietly because Owen was already asleep. And I heard Daniel's voice, low and warm, coming from the living room. He was laughing. That new laugh. The one I didn't recognize. I walked to the doorway. Dana was sitting on my couch. Daniel's hand was resting on her knee. When they heard my footsteps, they separated so quickly it looked rehearsed. I looked at them both, my husband, my sister, and I smiled. Not because I was okay, not because I forgave them. I smiled because in that single moment, something inside me went absolutely, completely quiet. And in that quiet, I made a decision. They didn't know it yet. They thought the smile meant I hadn't understood. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, though I did cry later, in the bathroom with the shower running so no one would hear me. I didn't sleep because I was thinking. Hard, clear, deliberate thinking of the kind that only comes when the fog of hope finally burns away, and you can see the landscape for what it actually is. I lay in bed next to Daniel. We still shared a bed because nothing had been said, nothing had been confirmed, and I had learned enough from my years at the firm to know that the moment you show your hand is the moment you lose your advantage. And I stared at the ceiling and I took stock. What did I have? A house with a mortgage in both our names, 2 children who were too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to be damaged by it. A part-time income that covered groceries and school supplies, but not a mortgage on its own. A retirement account that Daniel managed. A joint bank account. 11 years of a life I had built with my own 2 hands, now standing on ground I no longer trusted. What could I lose? Everything if I moved wrong. I had seen it happen at the firm. Women who acted on emotion, who screamed, who confronted, who posted things on Facebook, who called their mother-in-law at midnight, and who ended up disadvantaged in court because they looked unstable. I had read enough custody evaluations and financial affidavits to know exactly how these stories went when the woman made the first move badly. So I didn't make a move. Not yet. What I did instead was think about Dana, my sister, 4 years younger, the one my mother always called the fun one, the one I had defended at family dinners, the one I had helped move 3 times in 6 years, the one I had lent money to twice without asking for it back, the one who had sat on my couch with my husband's hand on her knee. The grief of that was something I couldn't look at directly yet, like a bright light that burned if you faced it head on. So I didn't face it. I filed it. I put it in the back of my mind in a folder I labeled later, and I focused on what I could control. By the time Daniel's alarm went off at 6:15, I had the broad shape of a plan. First, documentation. I needed a record of everything: finances, behavior, communications, timeline. Not accusations, evidence, the kind that holds up. Second, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A family law attorney who specialized in asset protection and custody disputes, someone who had seen every trick Daniel might try and knew how to counter them. Third, silence. I would say nothing to Daniel, nothing to Dana, nothing to my mother, who adored Daniel and would immediately call him, nothing to anyone who might, accidentally or deliberately, warn them. I got up, made coffee, packed the kids' lunches, and kissed Daniel on the cheek when he came downstairs. He looked at me carefully. He was watching for something, I realized, checking to see if last night had registered. I gave him nothing. I smiled and asked if he wanted eggs. He visibly relaxed. That told me everything about who he was, a man who believed that a woman's smile meant she hadn't understood. I had understood everything. That afternoon, during my lunch break at the firm, I sat at my desk and opened a private browser window. I looked up the 3 most highly reviewed family law attorneys in Franklin County. I wrote their names on a piece of paper I would take home in my coat pocket. I did not search from my home computer. I did not search from my phone. I had drafted enough discovery requests to know that digital footprints are read in courtrooms. When I got home, I went to the closet in the spare bedroom, the one Daniel never opened because it was full of my fabric and sewing supplies, and I pulled down a banker's box from the top shelf. Inside it were the documents I had always kept, out of professional habit: our mortgage papers, the kids' birth certificates, our marriage certificate, tax returns for the past 7 years, copies of our joint account statements going back 3 years, Daniel's pay stubs, my pay stubs, the deed to the house. I sat on the floor of that spare bedroom with the door closed, and I went through every page. And that was when I found the first thing Daniel thought I'd never look for: a credit card statement, one I hadn't known existed, in Daniel's name only, 11 months of charges, hotel stays in the Columbus metro area, restaurants I had never been to, charges at a jewelry store downtown on a date I recognized, Dana's birthday. I held the paper very still. Then I took my phone, photographed every page, and filed the images in a folder I created on an encrypted cloud account I had made that afternoon using an email Daniel had never seen. I labeled the folder Evidence. I went downstairs and made dinner. When Daniel asked how my day was, I said fine and handed him a plate. The plan had begun. The office of Margaret Hale, attorney at law, was on the 12th floor of a building on South High Street, with a view of the State House dome and the kind of quiet that only expensive offices have. I had taken a half day from work, telling my supervisor I had a dental appointment. I sat in the waiting room for 7 minutes and spent all 7 of them rehearsing how not to cry. I did not cry. Margaret Hale was 53 years old, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain. She had practiced family law for 26 years. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and her expression was neutral in the way that experienced professionals are neutral. Not cold, but steady. She had seen this before. She would handle it. I laid out everything in 20 minutes. The credit card statements, the photos I had taken, the timeline of behavioral changes, the dates of Daniel's gym visits that coincided with afternoons when Dana had been unavailable. I was precise. I was organized. I did not editorialize. When I finished, Margaret looked at me over her glasses. "You're a paralegal," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "That helps." She set down her pen. "Claire, what you've brought me today is a strong beginning. But for what you're describing, a custody case combined with a marital asset dispute, we need more. Specifically, we need to document the affair in a way that can be introduced as evidence of moral character. And we need a full accounting of marital assets before Daniel has any reason to move or hide them." "I know," I said. "I worked in family law for 6 years. I've read the affidavits." She almost smiled. "Then you know what we're building." "A case," I said. "Not a confrontation." "Exactly." We spent another 40 minutes going through strategy. She would file nothing yet. I would continue to document. She recommended I consult a forensic accountant, discreetly, to begin mapping marital assets. She gave me a list of what to photograph, what to preserve, what not to touch. I took notes on a legal pad I would keep in the spare bedroom closet, inside the banker's box, beneath the sewing patterns. I drove home feeling, for the first time since that December night, something that wasn't grief. It was something harder and cleaner. Resolve. But resolve, I was learning, doesn't mean the world holds still while you act. That same week, something changed in Daniel's behavior. Nothing dramatic, but I noticed, because I had trained myself to notice, that he began asking quiet questions. Where had I been on Wednesday afternoon? Had I talked to anyone at my firm about anything personal? Had I spoken to a lawyer? That last one he phrased casually, folded into a conversation about a coworker who was going through a divorce. But his eyes were on me when he said it. He was checking, which meant someone had told him, or he had figured out, that I was moving. I gave him nothing. I answered everything lightly and changed the subject to Owen's soccer practice. But that night, after Daniel fell asleep, I went to the spare bedroom and I sat with my phone and I thought very carefully about what I did and didn't know. I didn't know if he'd hired someone to watch me. I didn't know if Dana had noticed my coolness toward her, the unanswered texts, the canceled plans I'd manufactured, and reported it to him. I didn't know how much time I had. What I did know was that I needed the direct evidence now, not later. I had been holding back on one thing: Daniel's personal email. We had shared the password years ago during a trip when his phone died, and he'd needed me to check something for him. He'd never changed it. I had never used it, but I remembered it. I sat down at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, with the house completely silent except for Scout breathing on his dog bed in the corner, and I opened Daniel's email on my laptop. I was prepared to find scheduling confirmations, hotel bookings, maybe a message to Dana. What I found was a thread that went back 14 months. Not just an affair, a plan. The emails between Daniel and Dana mapped the entire arc of what they had been doing and what they intended to do. They had discussed the timing of a divorce. Daniel had asked Dana to research family lawyers, ironically in a different county, where neither of us had connections. There was an email from Daniel that read, "She'll never fight it. She doesn't have the money or the spine." There was another from Dana that read, "What about the kids?" And Daniel's response, "I'll get primary. She works part-time. I make 3 times her salary. It's not complicated." I read the entire thread twice. Then I photographed every screen. Then I forwarded 12 key emails to my encrypted account, from Daniel's account, and deleted the forwards from his sent folder. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. She doesn't have the money or the spine. I thought about that sentence. I thought about my banker's box. I thought about Margaret Hale and her silver hair and her 26 years of practice. I thought about Lily and Owen asleep upstairs. I wasn't angry exactly. I was something past anger, something that had no name but felt like a door closing very quietly on everything that Daniel thought he knew about me. I got up. I made myself a cup of tea. I went back to bed. The next morning, I called Margaret and told her we were ready to move. Margaret filed the divorce petition on a Thursday in February, while Daniel was at a site inspection in Westerville. By the time he was served at his office, which Margaret had insisted on because it mattered, I was already at Lily's school for a parent-teacher conference, sitting across from her 3rd-grade teacher discussing reading comprehension, as if the ground hadn't just shifted permanently beneath our family. I had also, the day before, moved half of the joint savings account, the half that was legally mine by marital property law, not a penny more, into a personal account Margaret had advised me to open. I had taken physical copies of every document from the banker's box and locked them in a safety deposit box at a bank branch across town. I had changed the password on my encrypted cloud account and enabled 2-factor authentication. By Thursday evening, Daniel knew. He came home at 7. He came home, which surprised me, and he stood in the kitchen doorway with his coat still on and his face the color of old concrete. The kids were in the living room. I had timed this carefully. I looked at him and waited. "You filed," he said. "Yes," I said, "without telling me." "That's how it works, Daniel." His jaw tightened. "We can talk about this. There is no reason to— The kids need dinner," I said. "We can discuss process through our attorneys." He left. He went to his brother's house, which I had anticipated. He did not take the children, because I had anticipated that too. I had spoken to Margaret about temporary custody arrangements, and we had a motion prepared. But Daniel, it turned out, was not working alone. The next morning, Dana called. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was 17 seconds long, and her voice was shaking. "Claire, please. Can we just talk? This isn't what you think. Please don't do something you can't take back." I listened to it once. Then I saved it to my encrypted folder. In family law, voicemails that reveal knowledge of legal proceedings before they're public can be significant. Margaret would want it. 2 days later, Daniel's mother, Patricia, a woman I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner for 9 years in a row, appeared at my front door uninvited. She told me I was destroying my family. She told me the children needed their father. She told me that whatever I thought I knew, I was misinterpreting it. I stood in the doorway and I listened to all of it. Then I said calmly that any communication about the proceedings needed to go through my attorney, and that she was welcome to have a relationship with her grandchildren through the channels that would be established by the court. She stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. Then Daniel escalated. Through his attorney, a man named Greg Paulson, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics in Franklin County, Daniel filed a motion claiming I had unilaterally depleted marital assets by moving money from the joint account. He also filed a motion for primary physical custody, citing my erratic behavior since the separation. He did not specify what erratic behavior. He didn't need to. The filing was designed to put me on the defensive. It also came with a personal message, delivered through mutual friends, that was less formal. "Tell Claire she should think about what this costs. Litigation is expensive. She's going to burn through everything fighting something she's going to lose anyway." I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Target when that message reached me, relayed by a friend who hadn't realized she was being used as a messenger. I looked out the windshield at the gray Ohio February sky. Was I afraid? Yes. I won't pretend otherwise. The money was real. The risk was real. The thought of a courtroom where Daniel's salary was 3 times mine was real. But I also had 14 months of emails between my husband and my sister in which they had planned this divorce, discussed hiding assets, and dismissed me as someone without the spine to fight back. I took that fear and I put it somewhere useful. I called Margaret. She told me Daniel's motions were standard aggressive opening moves and that she had already prepared responses. The money I had moved was within my legal rights. The erratic behavior claim would require evidence Daniel didn't have. And as for the custody motion, she said with the first edge of satisfaction I had heard in her voice, she was very much looking forward to what we were about to introduce into the record. We would respond in 10 days. Not before. I took 3 days. I sent the kids to my mother's. My mother, who finally knew everything, who had cried for an hour and then made me a pot of soup and told me she would do anything I needed. I slept. I took Scout for long walks along the Scioto River in the cold air. I cooked for myself, slowly, things I liked that Daniel had never liked. I read a novel. I sat in the quiet of my own house and I let myself feel the weight of everything, and then I set it down. On the 4th day, I got up and I went back to work. It came through Greg Paulson's office, a formal settlement proposal dressed up in legal language but transparent in its intention. Daniel was offering a settlement. He would drop the custody motion for primary physical custody, agree to a 60-40 split of the marital home's equity, and accept joint legal custody with primary physical to me, in exchange for my withdrawing all financial claims related to the credit card debt and any third-party claims. Third-party claims. That was the language they used for Dana. I sat across from Margaret in her office on South High Street, the State House dome gray in the winter sky outside the window, and I read the proposal twice. "He's scared," Margaret said. "He's protecting Dana," I said. "He's also protecting himself. That credit card, the one you found, some of those charges overlap with a period when he was reimbursing business expenses through his firm. If we subpoena his employer's records, we might find he was double-dipping. That's not a divorce matter anymore. That's potentially a fraud matter." I looked at her. "Is that something we pursue?" "That depends on what you want, Claire. A faster resolution or a complete one?" I thought about the email. She doesn't have the money or the spine. "Complete," I said. The settlement proposal sat unanswered on Margaret's desk for 8 days, which was exactly as long as we were legally permitted to wait before responding. On the 9th day, Margaret sent a single-line reply. "Our client declines and will proceed to discovery. I was told that Greg Paulson called Margaret within the hour. I was told he was not pleasant about it. I was at work when this happened. I was reviewing a lease agreement for one of our firm's clients, a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon task, and I was doing it with the same focused attention I gave everything, because that was the answer to people who thought I would break under pressure. I did not break. I narrowed. But even narrowed people need to breathe. My friend Renata had known me since college. She was a high school chemistry teacher in Clintonville, divorced herself. 3 years out now, 2 kids, doing fine. And she was the one person I had told early before the filing, because she had signed a confidentiality agreement in the form of being my oldest friend and someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Renata came over on a Friday night with Thai food and a bottle of Riesling, and she sat on my kitchen floor. We always ended up on the kitchen floor for reasons neither of us could explain. And she let me talk for 2 hours without once trying to fix it. She said, at the end, "You know what scares them? You're not hysterical. Women who aren't hysterical terrify people who were counting on the hysteria." "Dana always said I was too controlled," I said. "Dana is sleeping with your husband," Renata said evenly. "Her character assessment is not the one I'd be taking to the bank." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed since December. I also, during those weeks, found something I hadn't expected: community. A support group for women going through contested custody cases, run by a family services organization in Worthington. I attended twice. I didn't talk much, but I listened to other women describe what they were navigating, and I realized 2 things. First, I was not alone. Second, I was better prepared than almost anyone else in that room, not because I was smarter or stronger, but because I was a paralegal who had spent 6 years reading the exact documents these women were now drowning in. So I started helping, quietly. Not legal advice, I was careful about that, but practical guidance. Where to find resources, what questions to ask an attorney, what documents to preserve. The group facilitator noticed and asked if I'd consider coming back monthly. I said yes. It was a small thing, but in the middle of everything that was being stripped away, it mattered enormously to be building something, however small, with my own hands. I went home that night and checked on my kids. Asleep, both of them, Scout wedged between their beds, as if on guard duty. And I stood in the hallway of my house on Birchwood Lane, and I thought, this is what we're fighting for. Not the house, not the money. This. Daniel could have the argument he thought he was winning. I had something else entirely. Dana came to the house on a Sunday afternoon in March when the snow had finally started to melt and the front yard looked gray and tired and exposed. I saw her pull up in her silver Civic from the kitchen window. I stood and watched her walk up the front path, and I felt something complicated move through me. Not forgiveness, not rage, but something older and more exhausting. Grief, maybe. The specific grief of looking at a person you used to love and finding a stranger. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked thinner. There were shadows under her eyes that her concealer wasn't covering. She was wearing the blue coat I had always liked on her. "I just want to talk," she said. 5 minutes, please." I stepped back and let her in, because refusing her at the door in front of the neighbors was not a move I needed to make. I led her to the kitchen. I did not offer coffee. I stood on the other side of the island and I waited. She cried first. Real tears, I thought. Or real enough. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen. She said that she knew there was nothing she could say, but she needed me to know that she hated herself. I waited. Then came the second part, because Dana, for all her crying, had always been strategic. She was better at it than people gave her credit for. She said, "Claire, this case is going to destroy both of you financially. The kids are going to suffer. You're going to spend the next 2 years in a courtroom while Daniel's lawyer picks apart everything you've ever done and said. Is that really what you want for Lily and Owen?" "I want what's best for Lily and Owen," I said. "Then settle. Take the agreement he offered. You'll get the kids, you'll get the house equity. You'll walk away with something. If you keep pushing, Greg Paulson is going to subpoena your work records, your emails, your therapy notes if you have any. He will make this ugly, Claire. He's already talking about—" She stopped, as if she had said more than she meant to. "He's already talking about what, Dana?" I said. She looked at the kitchen floor. "He thinks he can argue that your mental state, your controlled behavior, the way you haven't reacted, looks like detachment. He's going to bring in a psychologist to testify that your emotional flatness is a concern for the children." I looked at my sister. Emotional flatness. So that was their next tactic. Because I hadn't screamed. Because I hadn't thrown things. Because I had handled this with competence and steadiness, they were going to argue that my steadiness was pathology. I almost admired the cruelty of it. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. My voice was completely even. Dana looked up. Something flickered in her face. Confusion or maybe fear. She hadn't expected thank you. "Claire, you should go," I said. "If you want to communicate further, please do it through the attorneys." She stood there for a moment. Then the tears dried and something else moved across her face. The thing underneath the tears. The thing she'd come here with. Frustration, calculation, the anger of someone who had played a card and watched it fail. "You're going to regret this," she said, quietly, controlled, almost as controlled as me. "Maybe," I said. "Goodbye, Dana." She left. I heard her car back out of the driveway and I stood alone in my kitchen in the gray March light and I waited for the fear to come. And it did come, because I am not made of stone. The psychologist tactic was real. It would cost money to counter. It might work. It might not. It might confuse a judge who was already swimming in paper. I stood with that fear for exactly the amount of time it took the kettle to boil. Then I made tea. Then I called Margaret. She already knew about the psychologist strategy. Greg Paulson had mentioned it in a pre-trial motion filed 2 days earlier, which she had not told me about yet because she'd been preparing a response. Her response was going to include the emails. All of them. If he wants to argue that your emotional composure is pathological, Margaret said, then we are going to introduce evidence of exactly why you were composed, because you were collecting evidence, because you were protecting your children, because the alternative, falling apart, was something you refused to do. Composure as strategy, I said. Composure as love for your children, she said. That's the narrative, and it's the truth. I sat with that for a moment. It was the truth. Every quiet morning, every normal dinner, every smile I had maintained had been for Lily and Owen, so they didn't feel the ground move before I was ready to catch them. Was I afraid? Yes, more than the day before. Did it change anything? No. It made it worse to consider losing, and worse to consider losing made me more determined not to. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in April. Margaret had told me to wear something neutral, gray or navy, and to keep my expression open and attentive. She told me to look at the judge when speaking, not at Daniel, and under no circumstances to look at Daniel's attorney. I wore a navy blazer and gray trousers. I drove myself to the Franklin County Courthouse on Mound Street, parked in the garage on Front Street, and walked in alone. My mother had the children. Renata had texted me at 7 a.m. Today you show them exactly who you are, which is someone they severely underestimated. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom and waited. Daniel arrived with Greg Paulson 10 minutes before the hearing. I had seen Paulson once before, briefly at a pre-trial conference. A tall man in his late 40s, with the particular confidence of someone who won often enough to expect it. He walked past me without making eye contact, which was strategic and meaningless. Daniel looked at me once. I looked back. His eyes moved away first. We took our seats. The judge was the Honorable Carolyn Reyes, a woman in her mid-50s who had presided over family court for 11 years. I had asked Margaret about her. Margaret had said, "She doesn't like theatrics and she reads everything. Make sure everything we file is airtight." We had made sure. Greg Paulson opened by laying out Daniel's case for primary physical custody. He cited Daniel's income, his stable employment, his involvement in the children's extracurricular activities. He mentioned, with careful vagueness, concerns about the plaintiff's emotional state during this period. He said the word detachment once, in a sentence about the children's well-being. Judge Reyes did not react visibly. She made a note. Margaret rose. She was not dramatic about it. She did not raise her voice. She presented our first exhibit, the forensic accountant's report, which showed that in the 11 months covered by that first secret credit card statement, Daniel had spent $23,400 on what we had categorized as the extramarital relationship. She noted that $4,200 of that overlapped precisely with Daniel's business expense reimbursements from his firm during the same period. She submitted documentation from Daniel's employer, a response to our subpoena, showing that he had, in fact, claimed business expenses during dates on which the credit card shows personal charges. Greg Paulson interjected once. Judge Reyes silenced him with a raised hand. Margaret then introduced the emails. She did not read all 14 months. She selected 8 emails. She read them in chronological order, with Daniel's name as the author clearly stated before each one. The courtroom was very quiet. I watched Greg Paulson's face. He had gone still, not the practiced stillness of a lawyer managing a difficult moment, but the particular stillness of a man watching something he didn't know was coming. His pen, which had been moving steadily, stopped. I saw the color drain from his face the way color drains from paper left in sunlight, gradually, then completely. He set the pen down. He did not pick it up again. He glanced sideways at Daniel, and in that single sideways glance, I saw everything I needed to see. Paulson had not known about the emails. Daniel had not told his own attorney what existed in that account. He had hired a man to fight a war and sent him in without a map. Daniel was looking at the table. Margaret read, "She doesn't have the money or the spine." I didn't look at Daniel. I looked at Judge Reyes. Judge Reyes was looking at Daniel, too. There was a quality to her attention that I recognized from years of watching attorneys work. The focused, patient attention of someone assembling a picture from pieces that are falling into place exactly as expected. She had read our pre-filed materials. She had known something was coming. Now she was watching it arrive. Margaret read the email from Daniel to Dana, in which he wrote that he had already spoken to a realtor, informally he called it, about listing the house. This was 9 months before he served me with any notice of divorce intentions. The forensic accountant's report, introduced alongside it, showed that during that same period, Daniel had made 3 transfers from our joint investment account to a personal brokerage account in his name only. He had then, over the following 6 months, quietly moved those funds into lower visibility instruments. He had been hiding assets for 9 months before filing. Margaret did not editorialize. She simply laid it all out, document by document, timestamp by timestamp, in the patient and meticulous way that 26 years of practice had taught her. She was not performing outrage. She was presenting arithmetic. Paulson tried to recover. He requested a recess to review the submitted materials. Judge Reyes granted 15 minutes. In the hallway, I sat on a wooden bench and drank water from a bottle I had brought. I did not go to the bathroom to cry. I did not call my mother. I sat very still and I breathed. Down the corridor, I could see Paulson standing apart from Daniel, speaking in a low, clipped voice with his back turned. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, his shoulders pulled inward, the posture of a man who had walked into a room expecting one thing and found something entirely different waiting for him. I had seen that posture before, on the other side of deposition tables, on people who had underestimated what the record contained. I looked away. I finished my water. When we returned, Paulson's opening composure was gone. His arguments had become reactive, responding to our evidence rather than advancing his own case. He challenged the authenticity of the emails. Margaret produced the forensic digital record showing they had been retrieved from the account under warrant, with chain of custody intact. He questioned the relevance of the asset movements. Margaret explained their relevance calmly, item by item. He returned briefly and unwisely to the emotional detachment argument. Margaret turned to face him for the first time and said, "Counsel suggests my client's restraint is a concern. I would submit that it is the reason her children have been stable, present, and cared for throughout this entire process, while their father was planning the sale of the family home 9 months before disclosing to his wife that he intended to file for divorce." Paulson did not respond to that. Judge Reyes made another note. When we broke for the day, a full ruling would take time, she explained, and additional filings might be required. I walked out of the courthouse into the cool April air, and I sat on the steps, and I let everything I had been holding very carefully in place settle. I was not finished yet, but I knew how this ended. Judge Reyes issued her ruling 6 weeks later. I was in Margaret's office when it came through. I read it sitting across from her desk, with my hands in my lap and the afternoon sun coming through the south-facing windows and falling across the pages like something deliberate. Primary physical custody, granted to me. Lily and Owen would live with me in the house on Birchwood Lane. Daniel was awarded parenting time every other weekend and one evening per week, a standard arrangement that reflected the court's assessment of stability and continuity for the children. The house. Daniel was ordered to make a buyout payment rather than force a sale, calculated at full equity value with a forensic accountant correction, applied for the 9 months of undisclosed asset movement. He would have 18 months to refinance or pay. The hidden brokerage account, folded entirely into marital assets for division. Daniel's attempt to remove it from the marital estate was ruled fraudulent concealment. Margaret had requested sanctions. The judge agreed. Daniel was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees. The credit card. The $4,200 in overlapping business expense fraud was referred by Judge Reyes to the relevant authorities for further review. That was not a family court matter. It would be handled separately. Daniel's employer was already aware because the subpoena had made it impossible for them not to be. He was placed on administrative leave the week the ruling came down. I did not celebrate any of that part. It was not something I had engineered. It was a consequence of what he had done, following the logic of its own path. I had wanted protection for my children. The rest was gravity. Daniel appealed one element of the ruling, the sanctions, and lost. The appeals judge reviewed the record, noted the volume and clarity of the evidence, and dismissed the appeal in a written opinion that was, from what Margaret told me, unusually direct in its language. She read me one sentence from it over the phone. I asked her not to read anymore. Some victories don't need to be savored out loud to be real. Greg Paulson withdrew from the case shortly after. I don't know the specific reason. I have my suspicions. Dana. Dana had not been a formal party to the divorce proceedings, but the emails had named her clearly and repeatedly. When excerpts from the proceedings became part of the public court record, as all family court filings eventually do, her name was in them. She was not charged with anything. She had not technically broken any law. But the town is not as large as people imagine, and the legal community is smaller still, and Dana worked as an office manager at a dental practice, whose lead dentist was the wife of a county commissioner, whose assistant was in my mother's book club. By July, Dana had lost her job. I did not cause that. I did not make calls or plant information. The emails were in the record. People read records. Daniel's employer concluded its internal review in August and terminated his employment. The referral from Judge Reyes had been taken seriously. He was not criminally charged. The amounts were at the threshold of what prosecutors pursue. But he was fired, and that information would follow him in his industry. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Gahanna and began looking for work. I am not going to tell you I felt nothing watching all of it happen. That would be a lie. I felt something complicated and not entirely comfortable, not satisfaction exactly, but the specific sensation of watching a structure collapse that had been built dishonestly, on false ground, and understanding that you were not the one who had weakened it. I had not destroyed Daniel. He had destroyed himself, one decision at a time, over 14 months, and I had simply made sure there was an accurate record of the demolition. What I felt most on the day the ruling came down was this. My children were staying in their school, in their rooms, with their dog, in the house I had kept. They would have both parents in their lives, on terms that were honest now, even if that honesty had cost everything it had cost to reach. Margaret called me the evening the ruling arrived to make sure I had read everything and understood the timeline for compliance. Before she hung up, she paused, the kind of pause that felt unplanned, coming from a woman who planned everything, and said, "Claire, In 26 years, I have had very few clients who came into my office with what you brought in that first meeting. You protected yourself before you even knew you needed protecting. I want you to remember that." I thanked her. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment with the phone still in my hand, and I thought about the woman who had sat on that spare bedroom floor in December with a credit card statement she wasn't supposed to find. That woman had not known she was protecting herself. She had only known she needed to understand what she was looking at. Understanding, it turned out, had been enough. Lily asked me that evening why I seemed different. I told her. I finished something that needed finishing. She said, "Like a book?" "Yes," I said, "like a book." She went back to her homework. Owen was building something with Legos on the living room floor. Scout was asleep under the coffee table. The house on Birchwood Lane was exactly as loud and ordinary as it had always been. I sat at the kitchen table, and I let it wash over me. All of it. Every quiet morning and every held breath and every document I had photographed in a dark, spare bedroom while the world slept. And then I exhaled, all the way out. By the following spring, my life looked different in ways that would have surprised the woman I was the December before. I had been promoted at the firm, not to attorney because that was not my path, but to senior paralegal and then to office manager, a title that came with a real salary and the kind of responsibility I had always been capable of carrying. My supervising attorney, a woman named Judith Park who had watched me work for 3 years, told me she'd seen the change in me from the outside. "You always did good work," she said, "but there was something you were holding back. That's gone now." I didn't explain what the something had been. I thanked her and went back to my desk. I enrolled in a weekend certificate program in family law mediation, a credential that would let me work formally with families in conflict, not just as support staff, but as a trained neutral voice. I had known, from the support group in Worthington, how much that was needed. I had known it from the women who sat in those chairs with stacks of paper they couldn't read and fear they couldn't navigate. The program was 18 months. I started in September. Lily joined a theater program at her middle school and got a speaking part in the spring musical. Owen became obsessed with chess and made his school's junior team. Scout acquired a slight arthritis in his left rear hip and slept even more than he had before, if that was possible. My mother came over for Sunday dinners most weeks. Renata and I resumed our standing habit of bad movies and good wine. The house on Birchwood Lane smelled different, I noticed. Lighter, somehow. Less like a performance and more like a place. As for Daniel, he found work eventually. A position with a smaller construction firm, at a salary lower than he had earned before, in a role that reflected what his professional reputation could now support. He came every other weekend, and to his credit, he was present for those visits. The children's relationship with him was their relationship, not mine to manage or diminish. I stayed out of it except where their well-being required me to step in, which it rarely did. He had stopped looking at me the way he used to, not with contempt, as he had in those final months of the marriage, not with the assessment of someone calculating odds. He looked at me now with something I recognized from years in a law office as the expression of a man who had lost a case he thought was unlosable and was still sitting with the loss. I did not gloat. I had nothing to gloat about. I had 3 things: my children, my work, and myself. That was always the inventory that mattered. Dana. I have been asked often what happened between us and whether I have spoken to her. The answer to the second question is no. Not once, not a text, not a birthday acknowledgement. I am not certain that will be permanent. I have no roadmap for how you return to someone who did what she did, or whether return is even the right frame. What I know is this: As of the year that followed the divorce, Dana had left Columbus. She moved to Pittsburgh. I heard this through my mother, who heard it through the complicated and efficient network of family information. She was working a different job, at a different salary, in a city where her name wasn't in any court records. Whether she and Daniel continued after the divorce, I don't know and didn't ask. I know that what they had chosen, in the end, was each other. Two people who had built something on deception and discovered that deception, as a foundation, does not hold weight. Whatever they built on top of it was their own problem now. I also know this. I received a card in the mail 9 months after the ruling. No return address, Columbus postmark. Inside, in handwriting, I recognize the way you recognize your own name. 3 words. I am sorry. I read it. I put it in a drawer. I have not decided what to do with it. Maybe I never will. Some things don't need to be resolved. They just need to be survived. The morning after I received it, I got up at 6:15, the same time Daniel's alarm used to ring, made coffee, packed Lily's lunch, reminded Owen to put his chessboard in his backpack, let Scout into the yard, and drove to work in the pale spring light on roads I knew by heart. My life. Quiet. Honest. Mine. It was more than enough. They told me I didn't have the spine. They were right that I didn't. Not the one they expected. Not the spine that flinches, that argues, that performs pain for an audience. I had a different kind. If there is a lesson in what happened to me, it is not be smarter than your enemies. It is simpler. Know what you're building before they know you've started. Document everything. Trust carefully. And when someone tells you, directly or indirectly, that they believe you won't fight back, let them believe it. What would you have done? I'd really like to know. Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe, because I have more to tell. Thank you for listening.